Okay, well this is a good crowd. When I first knew I was coming here, I didn't know if I needed to do an introduction or not, but there's a lot of people here that didn't hear me 2 years ago, so I better give a little intro on what we got going on here. Name's Brendon Rockey, part of Rockey Farms. For those of you that don't know, my crazy uncle lives over here in Delta now, Verlin. He's part of the blame for where we are now. About 20 years ago, he's the one that really led the charge as far as where we are today with our soil health, so I give him a lot of credit on that. We grow specialty potatoes, so not only how we're growing the potatoes is different, but the potatoes that we're raising are different too. We don't mess around with the russet potatoes. We like the stuff that looks different. We do the fingerlings, reds, yellows, purples, anything that's kind of unique. We grow both certified seed and fresh market potatoes, so we're pretty diverse there. Right now we're on a 2-year rotation. I'm not going to give a whole lot of detail on that right now, so we'll get into pretty good depth on that in just a minute. We are rotating with a multi-species green manure crop, and we're all under center pivot irrigation, which is a huge advantage for us. I know a lot of the issues you guys are having over here deal with the furrow irrigation. We're trying to figure out how to implement some of these things over here. So like I said, we're really working on our soil health since the early 90s. At the time, you know, we were really unique. We didn't have a whole lot of support on that. I give Brendon a lot of credit there. He was really a pioneer, was really looking outside of the box and helped us move forward there. One thing that makes us different too is I think part of the trouble with agriculture is we're way too hung up on yield and quantity. The one thing that makes us different is we really focus on quality. And what's really nice about that is when you focus on quantity, quality doesn't usually just happen on its own. But when you focus on quality, quantity usually comes along for the ride. So we've got a lot different focus there as far as what we're trying to produce. Like Mike mentioned, we no longer use chemical fertilizers. We don't use any toxic chemicals, yet we aren't certified organic. A lot of the practices we use overlap with the organic, but I think there is a time and a place for a chemical, and we like having access to that. But what's interesting is as we've improved our soil health, we don't need those chemicals anymore. We're using a lot of carbon-based fertilizer. I'll get into that in a lot more detail in just a minute. And we've seen nothing but positive results from what we've been doing. We've got a lot less pest and disease pressure that we're dealing with. Like I said, the quality of our crop's much improved, and we've never had to sacrifice the quantity of our crop as we've moved along. So now when I first put this presentation together, it is designed for potato growers. I mean, that's what I'm going to talk about today. But just because I'm talking about potatoes, and I know you guys aren't growing potatoes, don't be discouraged, because soil health is universal. There's a lot of things I'm going to talk about today that you guys can apply to any crop in agriculture. But like I said, what we're going to focus on is the potato crop. So no matter how you're growing the potato crop, we've all got the same focus. It is that potato crop. And no matter how you're growing this crop, there are several factors that surround the production of this potato crop. You've got pest pressure, insect pressure, you've got foliar diseases, you've got water, both in excess or not enough water, weed pressure, nematodes is a big issue for potatoes, fertility, and soil-borne pathogens. And I think everybody will agree that all of these things can have a direct impact on the potato crop. But the trouble with conventional agriculture is it has a very linear approach to dealing with these problems. When you have a very specific problem, you go out and you try to remove that problem. You try to kill that problem. But the thing we need to look at today is it's not linear like we want it to be. There's other factors in there that kind of mess up those lines. So we've got the other factors in here, like the predatory insects that conventional agriculture doesn't take into consideration. There's actually biology that lives on the foliage of the plant that is a huge factor that we don't take into consideration. You've got carbon in the soil, both active and inactive carbon. You've got the beneficial biology living in the soil, and you've got soil structure. I think one of the most underrated components of agriculture today. And I think the slate test does an excellent job of demonstrating that for you. So now, when you look at conventional agriculture and their approach, we'll start off with aphid infestation. That's a really big deal to us in potato production, especially with the certified seed program, because aphids can vector viruses in potato plants, and that hurts the quality of the seed crop. So in conventional agriculture, we go out there and we scout and we find an aphid population. So what's our approach? Well, the aphids are bad, so we must kill them and remove them from the system. So we apply an insecticide to do that. But what's the trouble with that? Well, most insecticides, they're going to kill off the aphid, but they're also going to kill off the predatory insects, which were actually out there helping us control the problem to begin with. So now that we've killed off the predatory insects, we're wiping the slate clean, and we don't have that beneficial component out there keeping everything in check. So now that we use that insecticide that first time, we've actually created a situation now where we're dependent on that insecticide. We used it the first time, we wiped the slate clean, so now you have two different groups of insects. You've got insects that feed off of plants, and you've got insects that feed off of those insects. So which group is going to come back first? Well, it's going to be the insects that feed off of the plants. So now we've opened up the door and created this opportunity where now we're susceptible to huge infestations of aphid coming in. Well, not a problem, because the insecticide worked the first time, so let's just put more on, right? Gary Zimmer has a term for this mentality. Well, if some worked, put more on. So he calls it the moron theory. And I think it's fitting. So now we have this little relationship going on here with insecticides, the insect pressure, and the predatory insects. But it goes well beyond that, because insecticides are designed to disrupt the nervous system of these insects that are causing damage to your plants. But there's also so many other insects out there that are beneficial to us, and we're harming a lot of them too. So here we are going after this aphid and trying to control them, but what other damage are we doing out there? You've got beetles and dung beetles, you've got all these critters out in the soil that are there with a purpose and a role, and here we're damaging them by chasing after this other problem. So now the next issue we have, another big issue with potato production is fungal issues, fungal disease, both on the foliage and in the soil as well. So once again, you can guess what conventional agriculture's approach is to this. You've got something out there causing trouble, so you go out there and try to kill it. You don't want it there anymore, so let's go out and wipe it clean and get it out of there. But what other damage are we doing when we apply these fungicides? You know, especially the soil fumigants. Well, it's damaging the soil biology as well. There's a lot of fungi that lives in the soil and on a plant that is very beneficial to us, but we're going out and chasing after these harmful components, and we're damaging all the good guys as well. And what's really interesting about that is, so we're out there trying to control these problems, we're killing off the other bacteria and fungi in the process, but it turns out that in the proper populations, that beneficial bacteria and fungi can actually control these problems for us. So once again, we go out there chasing a problem, trying to kill it and remove it from the system, and we're actually damaging the system even further, and now we have no choice but to use these chemicals, because we've created this opportunity where the disease is coming in and thriving. So now we're really in trouble, and we have to go out there and use more and more and try to catch up and control the problem. So now here's something that's really interesting that we're seeing in the valley. We're seeing huge increases in parasitic nematodes in the soil. And I think there's a huge correlation between the parasitic nematodes and fungicide use. And people have a really hard time making this connection. You're talking about a nematode, which is a little worm-like critter out there in the soil, and you're talking about a fungicide, two completely different things. But there's something going on in that soil that we weren't taken into account. The worm-like structures you see here, that is the nematode. And why it's so damaging to a potato crop is they can actually inject their eggs into a potato, and they will hatch inside the potato, and they create these big bumps on the potato, and it just destroys the crop for you. And where we're having the biggest issues with nematodes now in the valley are on the soils where we've used the heaviest amounts of fungicide. There's actually fungi that live in the soil that can trap and kill these nematodes for us. But here we are chasing these other problems out in the soil, applying fungicide, and we're killing off all the good fungi as well. And what you can see here is up in this picture, there's these loops on these fungi, and when that nematode swims through there, it triggers it, and the loop will start to close down, and it'll actually trap that nematode for you. Then that fungi will nematode. So every time we go out there with that fungicide application, we're killing off more and more of these and creating another issue out there. So now we have a nematode population that we need to keep in check. So what's our tool to go to there? We've got a problem out there, let's go out there and try to kill it. So now we're using nematicides. Every year in the valley, we're seeing higher and higher rates of nematicides being used. We're trying to chase another problem now. But what's really funny is when you look at conventional agriculture, all the problems we're dealing with right now are problems that we all created ourselves. There's nothing, no issue in the valley we're dealing with right now that isn't a result of something else that we've done. So now we're applying nematicides and trying to control the parasitic nematodes out there, the ones that are doing damage to the crop. But guess what? There's a lot of different nematodes out there. Out of all the nematodes that exist in the soil in a healthy system, only about 1% of them are actually damaging to the system. The rest of them are actually doing some good. They're part of the complete system. They're an important part of the nutrient cycling that takes place out in the system. So now we're throwing that out of balance as well. So how about fertility? We haven't talked about that yet. No matter how you're growing your crop, you have to have fertility inputs. We all need fertility. So here you notice I got that one in green. There's nothing wrong, nothing that can be bad about inorganic fertilizer, right? Because it's providing nutrient for the plant. How's that going to be damaged in the rest of the system? Well, what comes along with those inorganic fertilizers? Very high salts. And I got news for you. The bacteria and the fungi that live in the soil, they don't like high salts. Have you ever poured salt on a slug? It doesn't like it. You see a similar reaction when you're adding too high of salts to the soil. There's a lot of stuff out there that doesn't like that high salt, and you're creating an environment where that stuff can't thrive anymore. So now we haven't really talked about carbon and soil structure too much yet. And like I said, I'm glad they did the slate test this morning. It gives you a good example of that. So now that we've done all these other damaging components to this system as a whole, we're killing off the life in the soil. And the life in the soil is so important for many reasons. First of all, the bacteria comes in and they create microaggregates. They have little glues that glue these small soil particles together and create these aggregates. Then the fungi come in and create larger particles from there, giving your soil strength and structure. It opens up pores in the soil that allows gas to move through the soil. It allows moisture to move up and down through the soil. And when you don't have that life in the soil, it really damages the soil structure. And also, when you don't have that life in the soil, you're not returning the plant residue to the soil, you don't have any carbon in the soil. And carbon is really important to the soil structure as well. So the two things you need for soil structure is you need the life in the soil and you need the carbon in the soil. And those are two things that you can see by this diagram that we're really damaging those components. And where the carbon and soil structure really come into play is in irrigation, in your water. Water holding capacity, water infiltration rate. It's making irrigating much harder to accomplish. Now, I've got a really good example for you right here. We had a center pivot, 20 years ago that we ran it, and it always did this in the exact same spot every single year. We just accepted it. We knew it was going to happen. We had our straw bales out there ready to go out, shove under the track, get it through, and until we got that track compacted enough to get it through there. Now this picture I took was just last year, but it was the neighbor's field. Our sprinkler doesn't do this anymore. And Mike was out when we saw this one. He got all excited and jumped out and went and took a picture for us. So, that's what's funny about this. The guys that are running this pivot, they see it happening out there and they always want to blame the sprinkler, or they want to blame the soil type. But see, this is right across from the road from when our pivot used to do this. The reason this sprinkler is sinking down like that is because it's void of life. Life in the soil will keep this from happening. And we are proof of that because we don't have that problem anymore. Now we don't even crush the potato row at all. We don't hardly make a rut at all, but it's the exact same soil type. And we're growing the same crops as these guys. So now that we're affecting how we irrigate the crop, now we're ending up with waterlogged soils, soils that don't drain well. And that's a huge factor when it comes to weed pressure. Weeds like to thrive in stressed out soils. So now we have this soil that's stressed out. So now we have weed populations that come in and start taking over. So a lot of guys think, it's like, well, I don't have the soil structure, but I'll just manage my sprinklers different. I can do a better job, and I can get by that. And I'll agree. I mean, you can do a better job of running sprinklers in help reduce that problem a little bit. But part of the problem is there's a lot of guys where we're from that just do a poor job of managing their pivots as well. So if you have these problems, if you have a soil out there that's dead and doesn't have this life in there, and then you're doing a poor job of managing your pivots on top of it, now you've really got some problems. So once again, now we've got weed pressure out there. And how did we get this weed pressure? Because we're overwatering, because we don't have the life in the soil, because we don't have structure, we don't have carbon. Once again, it's a problem we created. So what's our solution going to be? We're going to go out there with a herbicide and try to kill off the weeds. Once again, trying to remove a living component from the system, a component that's there because we allowed it to happen, because we created the problem. Now, one way you can control the weeds without the herbicide is through tillage. But the trouble with that is as you till the soil, you're hurting these other components. So you get this vicious cycle that happens. So now you're out there tilling to control the weeds, but also you're losing carbon from the soil, you're destroying the biology in the soil, and you're destroying your soil structure physically. So now when you look at this, that looks like a mess to me. But honestly, that's where we were 20 years ago. That is exactly where we were. And you can see why we were so frustrated. Every time we had a problem, we thought we were doing the right thing, trying to go out there and remove the problem. But every time we solved one problem, we created two more. So here's what we did. We decided to wipe the slate clean. We started to look at the big picture. And we wanted to figure out, how do we heal the system and get this system to work together instead of getting it to work against itself. So if you notice, we've got the exact same components in there. Nothing's changed. All the same factors are there. But here is the base of everything we do now. It all starts with adding life to the soil. The two main things we got going for us is we're using green manure crops and we're using carbon-based fertilizers. Both of these components add some direct fertility because, with the green manure crops, we've got legumes in there, so they're fixing nitrogen. But it's also feeding the biology in the soil, which is even more important. Now, the same goes for our biological components. There's some nutrient that's available immediately, but the rest of it's going to the biology. The biology actually has to digest it before it becomes available to the plant. So what we did is we quit worrying about what the plant needs. That's the trouble with conventional agriculture. All they want to do is they've got the blinders on. They're looking at the plant. That's all they care about is the plant. What does the plant need? What's going on with the plant? What's harming the plant? What we do is we look at the soil. How do we heal the soil? Because once you have that soil underneath you, that healthy soil, it takes care of the plant for you. So we've actually made farming a lot easier for ourselves. We don't worry about the plant anymore. I take a lot of pride in how I run my center pivots. I'm very meticulous about running my pivots, put on the correct amount. You need enough water out there to sustain the plant, but you don't want too much. Now the same goes for the life in the soil. The life in the soil needs a certain amount of water to thrive and be healthy, but if you overwater, you're blocking off the pores, you don't allow them to respire, you block off the gas exchange, and you can harm them as well. So you want proper moisture out there. Now, we've greatly increased our carbon inputs. When you start talking to farmers, you ask them what's the most important element out there, nitrogen usually comes up. Carbon is actually the key to our success. We've added a lot of carbon back into the system. Now, carbon-based fertilizers, that's pretty obvious how you're adding carbon there, but the green manures have been a huge component for us. And I think most people assume where you're getting the carbon from the green manure is by when the residue is returned to the soil. But I don't think we're given near enough credit to the carbon that's being released through the root system in these green manure crops as well. The plants are able to exude the carbon into the soil right through the root system, and that's been a huge factor for us as well. Now we get the relationship that's going on here between the carbon, the soil structure, and the life in the soil. Instead of now where you hurt one of them and it hurts the other ones, you get this vicious cycle going. When you start to heal one of those components, it helps out the other components. So you get a really neat relationship that happens with all these. You need the life in the soil to create soil structure, but as your soil structure improves, you create a better environment for that life in the soil to thrive. And the same goes with the carbon. What you're doing is creating the proper environment for that stuff to live, and that's very critical. So now we have this good soil structure, and it's greatly changed how I irrigate my crops now. I have so much strength in my soil now that I don't compact my soils when I irrigate. I have a higher infiltration rate, so I don't waste any of my water. None of the water runs off and runs down through the furrow. It all soaks right into the heel, so I'm actually able to put less water on per irrigation. And also, the frequency of my irrigations is reduced too, because I've got a greater water holding capacity. So I've been growing a potato crop on basically about 13 inches of water. And it's really funny is when you go talk to the experts, they tell you you can't do it on less than 16. And most of the guys in the valley are probably using closer to 20. So I'm using a third less water to grow the exact same crop. And the trouble is, you know, the plant doesn't need any more water the way these guys are growing it, but just they're so inefficient at how they're using this water, it's getting wasted. And then another huge component of this is not only the soil structure, but the carbon we're adding to the soil as far as the water holding capacity has been huge for us. So now here's some pictures of our farm now. Up in the left corner there, you see the nice soil structure we have. It has a nice aggregation to it. It has a nice odor to it. It holds together well, but yet it's very pliable. The picture up on the right, those are our sprinkler tracks now. This is the exact same pivot that we used to bury down to the gearbox. The sprinkler out there where we used to have 2-foot ruts. Now it doesn't even crush my potato row. I have so much strength, I have so much aggregation out there, it supports the weight of that sprinkler as it's going across those potato rows. Earthworms, we've got so many earthworms out there, it's ridiculous. I can't dig a hill of potatoes without finding 2 or 3 of them. That's one of the components of the life in the soil that I'm talking about. It's a little bit on the larger scale, but very important. In the bottom right-hand picture there, what's really important about this picture is if you'll notice what this is it's a potato seed piece in the ground and it's sprouting, sending out shoots there, but look at the roots coming off of there. You see how those roots have the soils sticking around that root? Huge sign that we have plenty of life in the soil. The reason that is that those roots are exuding that carbon around there, feeding the biology right around that root, and that's where that biology is thriving, and it's creating those sticky substances that's creating aggregation right around that root. So we know we're on the right track there. The other thing that's been really nice is now that we're adding life back into the system, instead of going out there and trying to kill all these components, we've done so much to control the diseases that used to give us trouble on our potatoes. We used to have a fungal disease called Rhizoctonia. I'm sure you guys have all seen it because a lot of potatoes in the store you see, they've got a black crud on there and it kind of scrapes off, but that's Rhizoctonia. That's caused by a fungi that lives in the soil. We've almost completely eliminated that from our potatoes. Most guys go out and put Quaterson or a fungicide trying to control that. What we've done is we've added life to the system in the proper balance that it's actually controlling that disease for us now. We've made huge strides with fertility. You go and talk to the experts once again, how much fertility, how much nitrogen do I need to put on to grow a potato crop? Most of them will tell you between 150 to 180 units of nitrogen. We're using probably closer to 40. That just right there goes to show you how inefficient the conventional agriculture system is. That potato crop doesn't need 150 to 180 units of N, but we have to put that much on in order to get the proper amount to the potato because so much of it is lost. Volatilization, leaching, and all these other components. I like Jay's term there, it's a very leaky system. You got your bucket there, but it's got too many holes in it. We keep plugging holes by bringing the life back into the soil, having the carbon-based fertilizers out there. We no longer have nematode pressure. Never put out a single nematicide, but we no longer have nematode pressure in our potatoes. We did it through the carbon-based fertilizers and the green manure, bringing the life back in. I guarantee we've got that fungi out in our soil that's trapping and controlling those nematodes for us. So those guys aren't a problem for us anymore, but we've got tons of nematodes out there. They're the beneficial guys. The parasitic ones are the ones we've gotten under control. Usually the parasitic nematodes don't cause trouble in soils that are very high in organic matter and life. So we've been able to control that, and we're not chasing our tail on that one anymore. Predatory insects. Like I mentioned, green peach aphid is enemy number one when it comes to being a certified seed grower. When that aphid lands in a plant that has a virus and feeds off of there, its stylet injects that leaf, and when it leaves, it's got that virus on its stylet. It lands on a clean plant, feeds off of it, all of a sudden that plant is infected. We are the only certified seed grower in the valley that does not spray for aphid. And we are the only certified seed grower in the valley that does not have an aphid problem. Go figure. The way we do it is, yes, we have aphid out in our field. But it's a population that's in check. It's a controlled population. Because we have so many predators out there feeding off of these guys that they never have an opportunity to establish and create these huge populations. By adding life